So this is Loop Hero. So the idea is the world has basically been wiped, and the character that you're playing as has no memory of the world. Nobody has any memory of anything. Huzzah, we have a campfire. So this is like the camp part of the game, because the game is a roguelite. You know, you spend time going through the actual gameplay itself, which I'll show you in a second, but in between every single one of your runs, you come back to the camp, and you spend resources that you get during your runs through this game, because it's a roguelike, kind of like Darkest Dungeon, Slay the Spire, Dicey Dungeons. There's 1,000 roguelikes out there. Y'all know what a roguelike is. So this is where you spend your time building up your camp in order to get better resources to make your runs easier and also match the rising difficulty of the runs. So the idea is every single time you start a run, you get this loop. This is a path that your character will automatically travel around. Every single tile along the path will do something. And to start off with, all these path tiles are all wasteland tiles. And if you hover over it with your mouse, it'll tell you exactly what all these tiles do over here in the corner. So wasteland tiles have a chance every single day of spawning slime monsters. Slime monsters are like the easiest monsters in the game. So what's going to happen is your character, when you unpause it, your character is just going to circle around this loop over and over and over and over again, fighting monsters, gaining experience, gaining loot, and leveling up like you would in an RPG. The walking around in the loop and the fighting, though, is completely automatic. You have no control over what happens to it. When your character gets into a fight, they just back and forth with the enemies until they either die or they win. The only thing that you can do as a player is to make sure that they're decked out with the best loot that you can find, and you can also affect what is on all of these tiles, whether they generate different kinds of monsters or that sort of thing. The idea is to just send the hero around this loop over and over and over again and build enough of a loop that will power them up with enough fights and enough loot that they will get stronger, and they will give you resources to build your camp up. But you also don't want to make it too powerful because your hero might die. So at the start of this first loop here, I have no equipment, and all I can do is just run around the loop and fight these slimes. So I'm going to unpause and run into this first fight. And this is the fight. And again, this is completely hands-off. You have no control over what happens in the fights. And after every fight, you will get either equipment or loot, and you will get cards down here in the corner. Whoops. The cards down here at the bottom of the screen that you pick up will allow you to place tiles on the map. You can either place them on the loop, you can either place them around the edge of the loop, or you can place them way out here in the middle of nowhere. Different tiles will change what happens wherever you place them. This is a meadow, and a meadow is placed outside the loop. Not on the edge, just on the outside, wherever, outside here. And what a meadow does is when you have it down, it'll heal your character for 2 hit points at the start of each day. The days are not measured by how many times your character goes around the loop. The days are measured up here in the corner by this day progress bar. So whenever you see something that says once per loop as opposed to once per day, that's the distinguishing. Every time you pass by your campfire here, which was your starting point, think of it as like Go in Monopoly. Whenever you pass by your camp here, that's the start of a new loop. Whenever this bar fills up, and it ticks up every time you're unpaused, whether you're in battle or you're walking around, whenever it fills up, another day passes. And whenever another day passes, usually more monsters spawn and a bunch of other things might happen depending on what equipment you have, what you have in your camp, and what you have set up on your loop. So I'm going to throw this meadow down somewhere, and I can click and drag and put it anywhere, in any one of these green squares. Obviously, I can't put it anywhere on the loop, and I can't put it around the edge of the loop, but I can put it anywhere that isn't one of those 2 locations. So I will just throw it down here. So throwing that loop down, that meadow down, what that does is 2 things. One, it gives me a little bit of rations, which is a resource that you can take back to your camp. And also, now that it's out in the field, every time this day meter fills up, I get 2 hit points back. My character gets healed for 2 hit points. Now, what do we also got here is we also got ourselves some armor. This gives, in the character that I'm playing as, who is a knight, in his case, armor ups your maximum HP value, and also has a chance to give you other stats. But you can think of it, the equipment in this game, kind of like Diablo equipment. It has a chance to do whatever the base stuff does, and then it might have some enchantments on top of it that gives you extra stuff. In this case, attack speed. So I'm going to equip that, because I have nothing else to equip, and we're going to continue on. Okay, so got some more cards here. This is a grove, which we can place on the loop, and this is a spider cocoon, which we can place around the edge of the loop. A grove will spawn a rat wolf, which is a kind of monster, and spider cocoons will spawn, you guessed it, spiders. Now, why do you want to put this on your loop? Well, you want to fill your loop up with monsters for your hero to fight, because fighting monsters is the only way that you get equipment and gear and whatnot. So again, you're kind of playing as Dungeon Master in this sort of game, where the hero just does his own thing and just runs around and kills whatever it runs across. Your job is to build a loop that is challenging enough that they will power up gradually without getting killed. So now every time the day cycle restarts, the grove will summon a rat wolf, and it'll stay there on this tile, or it might move to one of adjacent tiles, because that's how rat wolves work. And at the start of every day, this cocoon thing will spit a spider out on this tile. Every single tile on the loop can hold a maximum of 4 monsters. Since I am the knight, I can wear armor, shields, rings, and weapons. There's other equipment slots that you'll see here. Some of them are grayed out because they're either stuff that we don't have access to, or it's equipment for other classes, which you unlock throughout the game. I've also got some more cards to throw down. A beacon. Beacons increase your movement speed when you're in the range of it. So you can put a beacon anywhere that isn't on the loop or around the edge of the loop. And you can see its sort of area of influence there. If you're in a tile that's in that area of influence, then your movement speed will be increased. And why does that matter? Well, if your movement speeds increases, that means you move faster and you get to the end of your loop before more days pass and more monsters spawn. It also has the secondary effect of any battles that you get into anywhere on these tiles that are in its effect of influence, the attack speed for all units in that battle, including your hero, will be increased by 20%. That can be good or bad depending on the battle and depending on the situation. We've also got a vampire mansion here. We can put that anywhere around the edge of the loop, and that will start spawning vampires onto the loop. It doesn't spawn them the same way the spiders spawn. It spawns them a little differently. A lot of the cards operate with different rules, and really understanding what the rules of each card does is kind of the learning curve of this game. I think everybody who's played it and everybody who's learned it over the last 72 hours will agree that that's kind of the fun of this game. It's learning what cards to place where, and a lot of the cards will synergize in certain ways that you're not initially aware of with other cards. For now, I'm going to throw this vampire mansion down right here. And now these 3 squares that are adjacent to this vampire mansion are now influenced by vampires, which means if I get into a fight in any of those 3 tiles, a vampire will show up and join the bad guys. And that's good and bad, because vampires are obviously very dangerous in fights. They have a health draining mechanic, but killing vampires also gets you good loot because they're vampires. Everything in this game is risk reward, and it's really understanding how all the mechanics fit together and assessing and min-maxing that risk-reward factor that is key to playing this game. So I'm going to let our hero go here. Also, passing through the grove there also got me another resource. So the more tiles that you have down on your loop that are not these empty wasteland tiles, the more resources you'll also gather. And since all the movement and all the combat is automatic, the game is very sort of passive. Like, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time. Once you're into a fight, the game takes control and you have no control over what happens. So all you can do is basically set things up so that your character has the best chance of winning the fights. But once the fights start, it's completely up to the RNG. So what do we have here? We have a mountain now. This is kind of like the grove that we threw down. If you throw down mountains out here in the empty space, you can start building the terrain around. Mountains give you a +5 HP for each adjacent mountain that's next to it. So what you want to do is, if you start getting a lot of mountains, you want to build them all next to each other because they start adding to your maximum HP. I also got some armor here. Whenever you're looking at equipment that you have, you can swap out equipment on the fly at any time, even during a battle. In fact, the battles will pause and give you time to think and look around through your equipment to swap equipment. You can swap any equipment you want, but you will always lose whatever equipment you're already wearing, and the new equipment will then be equipped. So you can't trade it. You can only just discard what you're wearing to put something new on. With that in mind, typically what you want to do is you want to have a look around at all the stats, and it gives you an easy way to compare them, and usually puts little up arrows or down arrows to identify which stat is going to be boosted or lowered. Since you don't get your old equipment back when you swap, you always want to trade up with everything that you equipped. So in this case, the armor I have on right now gives me +88 to my max HP. This armor that I could wear gives me +87, so that's not as good. Plus, the armor that I have on right now also gives me an additional 4% attack speed. So the armor that I'm wearing right now is better than this armor, so this armor I don't need. So what you can do is just leave it. Leave it in your inventory. And you have a grid of 12 inventory slots. Once your 12 inventory slots are full up, if you get any new equipment, the oldest piece of equipment in your inventory gets recycled into resources. And we got a sword. It does the same amount of damage as the axe I'm already equipped with, but it also comes with a damage to all ability, which allows me to do a little bit of damage to every enemy whenever I hit something. And it's got vampirism, which is like life drain. So that's really good. So I'm going to take that. My old axe is just gone, and we continue on. Now I'm rounding, and I'm coming close to the camp. Once I get to the camp, I get a little bit of health back, and the loop starts over again. And the idea is that you just keep going, loop after loop after loop after loop, and the loop is going to fill up with more and more and more monsters, but you're also going to get better and better loot. And the idea is to try and stay on the loop as long as you possibly can. Whenever you're at the camp, you can choose to abandon this loop. You can just walk away and go back to your camp. You can do that actually at any time, but if you do it while you're at your camp, you get to keep all the resources that you've collected. If you decide to abandon the loop anywhere where you're not at your camp, you only get to carry to retain 60% of the resources you gathered. So you can walk away at any time. Like, say I get around here where this lighthouse is or whatever, and my character starts getting really beat down and I think the next fight's going to kill me, I can just say, all right, I'm done, I'm walking away, and I only get to keep 60% of the resources that I gathered. If you die anywhere along your loop, you get to keep 30% of the resources you've collected. So dying is not advisable. So every time you come back to your camp here, you have to make a choice. You have to decide, do I want to risk going around the loop again in order to get more stuff, or do I want to cash out now and walk away from the table, as it were, with everything that I've collected so far? Like, if you get all the way to the end of your loop and you've gotten a bunch of resources, stuff that you don't want to risk giving up by either taking a death or walking away prematurely, then at this point you just tap out and walk away and you get to keep it all. But you have to make that risk reward decision every single time you come back to your camp. So that's kind of the fun of the game. Now we have a card here we can throw down called a battlefield. This thing kind of has the same sort of range as a vampire mansion. I can place it anywhere along the edge of my loop. And what it'll do is it will influence whatever tiles are next to it, kind of like the vampire mansion does. Every single time I go past my campsite, it'll spawn a treasure chest. Treasure chests usually have really good loot in them, but it has a downside to it. Any fights that I get into that are in close proximity to this battlefield, when monsters are killed there, they have a chance of coming back as ghosts, which is basically just another monster. So it makes the fights around it a little tougher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw that down right here at the start of my loop, because you can't get into any fights on the camp here. So the only possible place that I could get into a fight is this square right here. Right now there's no fights there anyway. So next time I come around the end of my loop and I hit my camp again, this will spawn a treasure chest and put it here, and then I can pick it up. And if I do get into a fight on this square, for whatever reason, I'll have to deal with ghosts, potentially. Now, at any time during the fights, if you have the option set to do this, you can hover over an enemy and it'll pause the fight and it'll give you a list of all of its stats. A lot of the enemies in this game, this is very sort of generic Dungeons and Dragons enemy fare. You're talking vampires, skeletons, zombies. Later on, you run into spiders and thieves and things like that. There's a lot of stat crunching in this game. If you're into that sort of thing, like you're into reading all kinds of stats and whatnot, there's a lot in this game for you to chew on. And we got a treasury. This thing's a fun little card that I can throw down. So a treasury is something that you can throw anywhere that isn't adjacent to any other tile that's on your map. So you can't put it on the edge of your loop, you can't put it in the middle of your loop, you can't put it next to any other tile on the map. It has to be completely empty space around it whenever you put it down. Because how a treasury works is if you surround it with 8 tiles, doesn't matter what they are, the treasury will open and you will get a bunch of resources. So these are sort of things that you can put things like meadows and mountains and woods and deserts when you get them later on in the game around. And when you surround it completely, it will bust open and you will get a bunch of resources. But there's a downside to that. As soon as the treasury is open, every couple of days or so, it'll start spawning gargoyles on your loop. So risk reward. Once again. Now, it has been 3 days since we were last on this tile, which means 3 different spiders have spawned here. So when I get into this fight, I got to fight 3 spiders at once. So this is kind of why letting the day cycle repeat over and over again and not going through your loop fast enough can get you into trouble, because these tiles can all start filling up with a lot of monsters, and the more monsters are in one spot, the harder the fights become. We also got us some loot here, so let's have a look here. We've got this dirk, which does a little bit more damage than what I've got equipped. It gives me a regen per second, and it gives me a +6 to evasion. So all your stats are always listed down here, so you can always have a look and compare what stats that you have compared to what you're looking for. In the case of the warrior, who we're playing as right now, you're basically looking for high damage, high defense. It's a warrior. I mean, you want high armor, high damage, high defense. But you might also try to, you know, lean more towards equipment that boosts your vampirism. Like I have a vampirism of 15%, which means I drain health at a 15% rate. If you can get that even higher, then you will drain more health every time you hit an enemy. And that might be a good thing, but there are certain cases where vampirism can backfire on you. I don't have any examples to show you of that right now, but just know that, you know, you don't want to max out vampire, like a really broken skill like that, and think that you're just going to power through your entire loop without it catching up to you. Oh no. There are always things to consider whenever you're trying to spec your character a certain way. There's a downside to being a vampire. There's a downside in this game for anything that regenerates your health. Certain tiles will reverse that effect on you. I believe it's swamp tiles. If you're in a swamp tile, any effect that would gain you health, whether it's vampirism, regen, the only thing that I think it's not affected by is health potions, which you get later on. But whenever the day resets, you know, these meadows that we have down here, they always give you 2 HP for every meadow that you have on the board at the beginning of every day. But if you're on a swamp, that gets flipped and you take the damage instead of regenerating the damage. So you have to watch out for that sort of thing. I'm gonna start putting the meadows around the treasury here. Now, a couple of things happen here. One, meadows turn into blooming meadows whenever they're next to a tile that isn't another meadow. So you notice these meadows down here are just regular meadows. They heal 2 HP at the start of each day. This is a blooming meadow, which heals 3 HP at the beginning of each day because it's next to a tile that isn't a meadow. So there was kind of a double reason that I put that meadow right there. One, it helps fill the spaces around the treasury. 2, putting it next to the treasury turns it into a blooming meadow, which is more effective. So the more meadows that you can fill out your board with, the more HP you will gain every single time the day resets, unless you're on a swamp. If you happen to just be walking through a swamp and this meter fills out and resets, bam, you get hit by a bunch of damage. We've got some more road lanterns. These are kind of like the beacons, but they operate a little differently. These things have the same sort of area of influence as a vampire mansion or a battlefield. What they do is they decrease the maximum number of monsters that can be in the tiles that are adjacent to. So remember I said that each tile can have a maximum of 4 monsters. If the tile's in the influence of one of these road lanterns, it can only have 3 monsters in it. So these are a good way of sort of calming down things like spider nests that tend to have a lot of monsters on them since a spider spawns every single day. So do you have to use the cards every time you get them, or can you ignore them? That's a great question. You don't have to put down a card in your hand ever if you don't want to. But the only way that you'll fill out this second meter down here, which is underneath the day meter, is by putting tiles down. This is the map completion meter. When this meter gets all the way to the full, the boss appears, and he appears in your campsite. So if you're looking to actually finish this run, complete it, and beat the boss, then you're going to have to put down tiles. Certain tiles fill this meter out more than other tiles do. Obviously, safe tiles like mountains or meadows or things that give you benefits don't fill up this meter nearly as much as putting down dangerous things like vampire mansions or battlefields or groves or things that generate monsters. So you can leave cards in your hand if you want to, but the longer that you leave your cards in your hand, the longer this meter does not fill up, and the more times you will go around the loop. And by the way, every single time you go around the loop, over here, this loop enemy level will go up by 1. So every time you go through the loop, the monsters get stronger. That includes the boss. So if you spend way too much time just circling your loop and fighting and not putting anything down and fighting wussy little monsters over and over and over again, by the time you get to the boss showing up, the loop level is going to be through the roof and you're not going to be able to beat it. So much like everything else in this game, the not putting cards down on your loop is a risk-reward decision that you just have to make. That being said, though, say, for example, you get a bunch of cards in your hands that you just don't want to put down for whatever reason. Maybe your loop is filling up and you don't feel safe putting any of them down. You can leave cards in your hand up to a maximum of, I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but there is a maximum amount of cards you can hold in your hand. And much like your equipment, Once you start hitting that maximum number, if you get more new cards, the older cards in your hands will get recycled out of it and turned into resources, much like your equipment does. So that's a good thing because it gets you more resources, but it might also mean that you lose some cards if you're not paying attention. Like if you get absorbed into a fight in which you can't do anything about until it's over, and it spits out like 4 cards at the end of it, and it bumps the last 4 cards that you had in your hand, and one of them was one you wanted to hang on to. Guess what? You've lost that card now. Grinding is not helpful. No, in this game, grinding is not helpful. Obviously, the appeal of this game, though, is that it very much has that very strong, once you finish a run, you want to start a new run immediately. And that's where this game gets really addictive. But no, grinding within a singular loop itself, not usually effective. What you have to do is, like I said, be smart about building your loop in a way that your hero can handle and get strong from, but not in a way that it will defeat or kill your hero. And the game likes to throw a lot of monkey wrenches into your design plan as well, because there are certain conditions and certain things that will happen that will generate stuff on your loop without any input from you. So I made it back to my camp, so I get a bunch of health back, and now I have to make the decision. Do I go around for another run, or do I walk away with just these resources? I've got a lot of health. I think I'm doing pretty good. The loop is not that dangerous right now, so I'm going to try for another run. So I get a treasure chest, and inside, ooh, some level 3 armor. So that sends my max HP up from 88 to 249. Plus, it also gives me a counter attack percentage of 9%, and it does damage to all 4. So that blows my old armor out of the water. So I'm going to equip that and continue on. Level 4 sword. That does way more damage than the little knife that I have here. I lose the regen and the evasion, but the damage boost is just worth it. So I'm going to trade that up. You always want to trade up your equipment. The only time you wouldn't trade up your equipment is in certain circumstances. You'll notice that I've been building these mountains over here in a 3x3 square grid. This is one of the secrets that the game never tells you about, that you just have to learn about from friendly people who might give you clue you in on stuff. But if you build a 3x3 grid of mountains and rocks, it'll turn into a mountain's peak, which you just saw there gave me a bunch of resources. I also got a 120 hit point bonus to my maximum hit points, so building that was a really good idea because now my character's that much stronger. However, this is going to start summoning harpies and putting them on my loop. So everything good that you do in this game has a price, and you have to weigh those options every single time you throw a card down or every time you decide to go run your loop again. Now, here's another one of those monkey wrench situations that I was just talking about. I just put down my 10th rock or mountain tile, and it summoned a goblin camp on my loop. So now this is going to start spitting out goblins. So every day or so, goblins are going to start spitting out. And goblins are nasty monsters to deal with because they're really fast and they have some abilities that synergize with each other, so they can be difficult to deal with. If you have trouble reading this pixelated font, there is the option to change it back into an easier to read font. It doesn't aesthetically look as good, in my opinion, because it turns it into like an Arial font, which just looks very striking against the rest of the pixelated design of the game. But for those of you who have trouble reading fonts like this, there is that option. There's that accessibility option. There's even a dyslexic version of the easy to read font that you can turn on as well. So there's accessibility options. And we got some more cards down here, including the Oblivion card. This is a card that will pop up every now and then that you'll probably want to hang on to in case of an emergency, because this is basically nuke a tile card. This will destroy any tile, anything that's on that tile at all. It'll kill any monsters on it, and it will destroy any terrain. If it's on your loop, it'll turn it back into one of these wasteland tiles. If it's anywhere else, it'll just blow away whatever's there. So you can use this, for example, Drew's a big fan of doing this, of using this to nuke goblin camps if they spawn somewhere inconvenient for you, if you don't want them around or whatever. Or say, for example, if we do crack this treasury, after you open a treasury, you get a bunch of resources from it, but then it starts spawning gargoyles and putting them on your loop. If you don't want those gargoyles to spawn, you can use the Oblivion card to nuke it. We got equipment, orange equipment here. You notice the equipment tiles have different colors in the background. Gray means that they're vanilla-ish, I guess, and all they have is their base ability. Swords do damage, shields give you defense, armor gives you max HP, rings give the warrior any kind of random ability. But if it's blue or yellow or red, then they might have a secondary, a tertiary, or even a fourth ability on them. So the blue ones have one additional ability, yellow has 2 additional abilities, orange has 3 additional abilities. You still have to weigh your options whenever you're deciding what equipment to wear, because again, you don't get the old equipment back when you decide to swap. But we have a level 1 shield that just gives us 4 defense versus this thing, which is 8 defense plus a bunch of different other things. Regen, vampirism, evasion, so we're going to take that shield. And we made it back to our camp. Now it's time to decide, do we go around again or do we walk away? I suppose I can put this battlefield somewhere. I tend to put my battlefields near the beginning of my loop. Although I put them too close together, and that's created what's called a blood path. So this is something you have to watch out for when you put battlefields down. If you put them too close together, the loop tiles between them will become a blood path, and that thing spawns blood clots, which are monsters that are kind of nasty to take down. So I now have the added advantage of getting 2 treasure chests every single time I go around my loop, but the disadvantage is now I have to deal with blood clot enemies on that path. So risk reward. There's no undo in this. When you put a tile down, it's set. And very often you'll put something down and not remember, like I did just now, that if certain conditions are met, certain things might happen. And you'll end up screwing yourself over, monkey wrenching your own loop without even intending to. So you have to be wise and go through loop after loop after loop and learn all the game's interconnected mechanics and whatnot. And that's kind of the fun of it, really. So the chest had a level 4 ring with some good stats on it, regen and damage to all. I think I'll take that over the vampirism. And we got a level 4 shields. Defense goes up by an additional 6, so that's 18 defense over this 8 defense. That's pretty good. I lose my evasion and my regen, but I get some magic damage. I think that's a good trade-off, so I'll take that. And there's no undo over here with your equipment either. Once you swap out a piece of equipment, the old one is gone forever. We got a cemetery. This is kind of like, this you can put on your loop, and this will spawn skeletons. Skeletons are pretty beefy. Well, they're not beefy, they're skeletons, but they're pretty tough to beat. But they usually drop good loot. So let's throw down this last mountain. That'll crack open this treasury. That gets me a bunch of resources, some good loot. Those are some nice looking swords, and a few more cards. But now that treasury's open, it'll spawn gargoyles on my loop. So if I wanted to, if I didn't want to deal with gargoyles, I could oblivion the hell out of that empty treasury because it's served its purpose. Actually, what I think I might do is I might use an oblivion on one of these battlefields and get rid of that blood path, just because I wasn't thinking when I threw that one down. So yeah, you can use oblivion on any tile you want and it'll just nuke whatever's there. Kaboom. Oh, the blood path stays. Okay, that's something I didn't know. And these are the things that you can do throughout the game, and you don't get any undos or takebacks, so you just keep doing stuff that you think might help you out or whatnot, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, and you learn, you know? Unless you've got a trickie in your chat or whatever who's there to always tell you every single thing that you're doing wrong. But you learn that way too, even if it's a more frustrating way to learn. I sound like a broken record, and I apologize for those of you who've heard me say it over and over and over again, but this game is like, you look at trailers and screenshots of it and it just looks like some old DOS game or whatever, but it isn't until you see it and you have somebody break down exactly how the game plays that you sort of get a sense that maybe you want to try it. And it isn't until you try it that you really get hooked on it, because it very, very, very much has that one more try thing. Like when we get to the end of all this looping and whatever, and when you decide to walk away and cash out and take all your resources back to your camp, you can build your camp up a little bit. Now you have like some more powerful stuff in your camp that will feed into your next run. And then you want to start your next run up again, because when your next run starts up, everything gets wiped and you start a brand new run, and you figure, okay, this time it's got that same sort of thing as every roguelike has. You know, whenever you want to start a new run in Hades or do a new run in Slay the Spire, you know, you want to start off with just very basic stuff and you want to slowly build it up to the point where you can get on top of it and master it. And it's addictive. What I might suggest then, for those of you who are looking at this and being like, ooh, that seems tempting, but maybe not right now. I can't imagine we're too far away from the spring Steam sale. So, you know, there is a handy wish list function on Steam. For those of you who game on Steam, that is. I don't know if this is out on any of the other consoles. Somebody might have to oracle that for me. But I can't imagine it's going to... It'll if it's not out on any other consoles or platforms besides Steam, I can't imagine that it'll stay that way for too long, because this game is taking off. I believe in the last... Because it only launched, I think, last week, late last week, Thursday or Friday or so. I think I read that they've had 500,000 sales of this since it launched. That's pretty impressive for just a little indie game like this. So I got the feeling this is going to take off, and they've said that they've got plans down the line to pump some more content into this game. And I've only showed you guys in the last hour or so just one loop. My friends and I, we've all been playing this all weekend, and we've been just doing loops after loops after loops. And you're only seeing the first loop of the first chapter, and there's quite a lot more to this game that we haven't even gotten to the deck building stuff. Like these cards that I'm pulling here for the putting down all the tiles, you can build a deck before you run out on your loop and customize it when you start learning what cards synergize with other cards and what cards are good for whatever hero that you got. Then there comes that deck building part of the roguelike as well. It's also a really good hangout game. Like my friends and I have discovered, we were playing this game all throughout the weekend on my Discord server, and it's a good game to sort of have on. And because of the whole pause nature of it and the automaticness of it, like I can unpause this and let the fight just do whatever, because since I have no control over the fight anyway, except possibly to pause to swap equipment or whatever, but there's only so much you can do with that. You can sort of let your eyes drift away from the screen every now and then if you want to like have something else on while you're playing this game or whatever. And it's good for streaming too, because I can, you know, hang out and chat with you guys while the fights go on, and I can always check back in a few moments later. It's got that sort of Darkest Dungeon sort of feel to it, where, you know, at any time you can just stop. The action will stop and wait for you, and you can continue on at your own pace. So this is probably going to blow up as a streaming game for sure. All the pausing that you're seeing in the game right now is mostly because I have the options turned on. There are ways that you can turn off some of the pausing so that your character will just circle around the loop without any input from you whatsoever. I would not recommend that for beginners, because that's a very advanced tactic, because you have to keep an eye on your player. But I believe Tricky managed to pull it off one of the times we were playing over the weekend, where he had a character that was just so overpowered that he was steamrolling over every single fight and not even taking any damage. And so he just sort of turned all the pausing mechanics off and just, you know, let go of the wheel and let the game spin for a little while. Eventually the game, if you were to do that though, eventually, because every time you finish a loop, the loop level goes up and the monsters become stronger. Eventually, you know, the game would catch up with him and eventually put him down. But, you know, that's something that you can do as well. You can strive to maybe get to that point as well, because the whole time you're doing that and spinning around the loop or whatever, you're killing monsters. You're getting more and more and more and more resources that you can take back to your camp to build up your camp. I might see if I can make it to my camp. I'm not too far away. There's only about 4 battles along the way, although this is a lot of spiders between me and my camp. If I can make it to the camp, then I can just like tap out, walk away from the table, and then take all the resources I've collected back to my camp. I'm going to keep throwing down these mountains and meadows though, because the benefit to my hero is kind of a non-issue at this point, because we're looking to end our run here. But I am still collecting resources every single time I put one of them down. Now we get back to camp, and now we can choose to just end the run right here. If I were to choose to do another round, then I would have to fight through all of this nonsense before I could get back here to take my resources home. But I'm not liking my chances, because I barely made it back to camp with all my health, and the loop's only going to get harder. So at this point, I want to just play it safe, tap out, ignore Tricky, and walk away. So I will retreat, and that sends me back to my camp. That could be an example of your very first run. We didn't even see the boss show up because we didn't throw down enough tiles. The game also comes with 3 save slots as well. So if you want to get this and you have others in your household who also want to separate your run from their runs, it has space for 3 save slots. So now that you're in your camp, what you can do is you can use all the resources that you collected every single one of your runs to build new things on your camp. And the more stuff you build and upgrade, the more benefits they give you on each one of your runs. Having finished my first run, I built a little bit of my camp. Now I go out for the second run. And again, this is where the appeal of the game comes, because it builds me a brand new loop. The loops are always randomized, and now I get to start with a clean slate. So now I get to try and build this loop better, and hopefully I'll have better luck with the RNG on this one, and I'll be able to get more resources and better loot and whatnot. And you just keep playing it over and over, and you will see hours disappear as you're playing through this game. It's happened to pretty much all of us that have gotten in on it, and it's a mark of a really good indie, if you ask me.